There were a number of other female leaders who were feeling marginalized at the same time. And we just didn't see how we could change the situation. And there was no support for it. And I'm like, I have a choice. I can just change who I am and how I lead, or I'm going to have to make a decision to walk away.
Today, I'm here with Kathy Eastwood, a leadership strategist and former executive operator who spent more than 30 years leading transformation inside global enterprises, high growth startups, and private equity backed companies. Today, she helps leaders build high performing teams without relying on burnout, fear, or command and control leadership. Thanks so much for taking time to be out on our show today, Kathy.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Well, I want to jump into what was going on when you faced the decision whether or not to leave a toxic job. Can you talk to us a little bit what was happening at the time?
Yeah, I had actually it was probably the third position that I had been named to be the successor for my bosses. And for the third time I wasn't. And suddenly I was found reporting to a leader who was all about command and control and very toxic. And it really started to go against who I was and my values and what I believed in. I had learned that the best way to drive change was to care about your people. You could have results and care about your people. So that's what my values were. And he was a command and control. He would just tell us how to do. And then I'm like, well, why do we need to do this? I always wanted to understand why so that I could help my teams with it. And he's like, I don't know why, just do it. I told you to do it. And I'm like, all right, not the way I like to do things. And it wasn't until I barked back one day and one of my team members, I was asking them to do something and they asked me why. And I said, I don't know why, just do it. And I went, oh, this is not healthy. This is not good. I'm losing myself. It was impacting my relationships at home. It was, people I worked with, the people in my life. And I said, I just can't do this anymore. And I was in one of those situations where you're working so many hours, you're so stressed out. I didn't have time to look for another job. And I said, you know what? I need to walk away. It was a well paid job. I had multiple year over year, we're getting the stock options. And I just said, I need to take care of me. I have to make myself a priority. And I left a corporate role with nowhere to go and to decide what was going to be next.
And so, talk to me a little bit about how, like, obviously, you were saying the moment that you started reflecting the same behavior as your boss, the boss was kind of the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, of this is not me. I'm not being true to my identity. But what else was going on that was really like starting to clue you in? Um, about whether you just push through and wait for a new boss because inevitably that would happen anyway, or leave. Like, what else was going on at the time?
It was also, I was spending more time talking about the issues and not being able to adjust it. I'm someone that delivers results. I love to drive things forward. And I was no longer in that success mindset. And I was just complaining. I felt like I was a victim. I was just not moving things forward. And I wasn't able to accomplish what I wanted to. So it was eating at me. And by the way, Jana, I wasn't the only one in this situation, right? So there were a number of other female leaders who were feeling marginalized at the same time. And we just didn't see how we could change the situation. And there was no support for it. And I'm like, I have a choice. I can just change who I am and how I lead, or I'm going to have to make a decision to walk away. And, there was a lot of things on the line when you're making that decision, and it was scary. And I'm like, can I do this? I, I'll tell you the story of what really helped solidify it. 6-hour drive with my husband
And
up to um, we were going up to Rochester and I was walking everything through in my head. Is this the right thing? Why do I want to do this? And so after 6 hours, he said, so can I just summarize this? You don't want to work for stupid poopy head anymore. And I'm like, that is absolutely the situation. And yes, you're right. And he goes, well, then you need to make that decision and move forward.
And so I'm sure somebody would have in their mind, well, why not go talk to HR or something like that? Were there avenues within your organization that you could have pursued, especially if other people were encountering similar situation?
The time was there was a lot of stress and drama going on in the organization, and
Mm.
there wasn't a lot of bandwidth to hear some of these issues. Things had to get done. This leader who was command and control, what had the right folks' ears, was able to
Mhm.
drive some results. And so his style was working to get results. And so there
Mhm.
wasn't a lot of spaces to be able to be heard, if you will.
And so when you were looking at this, I mean, did you spend much time thinking through, I mean, it sounds like you were on a 6-hour car drive talking about it, but did you kind of outline what options you had? Like, did you talk about, oh, could we go to HR? No, that won't work because, we won't be heard. Should I go, I don't know, stick with my current job while I look for a job? I mean, what did you think through during this time?
I think the first thing is financially, can I find another job? First and foremost, can I get another job? Right? Like, and should I do that first before I leave this job? HR is definitely one that you think about, will that make a difference? It's, do I just leave? Right? And if I do that, what will be the implications? How could we afford this? So there was a lot of modeling that went on and a lot of what
Mm.
ifs. So what if I left and didn't have a role? Well, I might be able to find something quicker because I'm not working, and so therefore I can do that. Could I take a year off and figure out what I want to do? Can we financially afford that? So there were a lot of what if scenarios that I played
Mm.
through to say, you know, do I just stay and keep my head down?
Mhm.
Do you focus on your health? That was another one that I thought about. I just focus on my health. I will do a good enough job and hope that I get pushed out if that's going to be the case, right? So
Mhm.
there's a lot of different things that did absolutely go through my head of what else could I do. And it really wasn't until I realized that it was changing who I was that I wasn't going to be able to stay. And that was ultimately then,
Mm.
and I didn't have the bandwidth to find another role at the same time.
And so when you were going through this what if analysis, what was your worst case and what was your best case scenario that you kind of came up with?
Best case is I find my dream job and I get to work with people that think and act and succeed the way I've done throughout my career. And the worst case is one that I've used for years and a lot of different decisions I've made through my life. Worst case scenario, I'm back on my parents' couch, and they'll help me financially.
That's my worst case too, living in my parents' basement. Nice. And so who else was impacted? You mentioned a husband. Did you have children? I mean, like extended family, friends? Like who is being impacted by, your current state as well as any decision that you would have made?
Uh, yeah, I don't have kids, so it was my husband and I, but I'm very close to my parents and my sibling, my sister, and I just was barking at everyone. The stress levels were high. I wasn't seeing my friends because I was so focused on the work environment, taking care of all of that. So it was really the immediate circle. Um, and I'm trying to think if there was.
Did they
Go ahead.
they notice before you did at all? Did anybody comment on your change in demeanor before maybe you even
Oh,
noticed?
my husband notices it the first all the time. And it ekes out, right? Like, you don't even
Mm.
realize what's happening, and it would just be me barking at, "No, we're not gonna do that," or, "I can't do that." Like, it just wasn't my natural state, and, the other side was my team, quite honestly. I had a large team that I was managing.
Mm.
They started to see the impact because I was trying to protect them, I was trying to help them, but I just couldn't show up the way I knew I wanted to.
Mhm. Yeah, that's really difficult. And that's really draining for your whole person. Like, tell me a little bit about like what ended up happening health wise, because often we don't think about the physiological manifestation of these emotional, mental challenges that actually play out physically.
Yeah, it was, gained weight, wasn't exercising.
Mm.
which then makes the stress greater, which then makes the attitude and how I'm showing up worse. So I call it the vicious cycle. You just get into this cycle of it's like you're spiraling out of control and you feel like there's no way to stop the madness. And what I found is I will look at something and find something else that's wrong. And then the next thing, and it's like you're picking at it and it just gets worse and worse. And so I needed to find a way like, how do I stop it? And how do I look at this and say, I need to not live based on the fear, right? And that's what I was ultimately doing was thinking about everything that could go wrong. Like you were asking me about the different options, right? But, you think about, for me, I get caught up in the fear. Well, fear that I'm never going to find another job. I'm not going to be able to make enough money. We're going to lose the house. We're going to like every possible and just start that spiraling. And that's, impacts the health. And then you get into that not feeling well and it starts again.
So do you make that fear manageable? Because obviously fear is a natural state. It's even a healthy state, right? Because it helps us keep us alive, but it's how you manage that fear. So what did that process look like for you?
It was naming everything. So I have a term now after working with some different coaches and therapists is name it to tame it. Right. So what
Yeah.
are those things that are really spiraling, in my mind? And you asked me a perfect question, which is what I'll ask, often is what's the worst thing that can happen? And so as I put it down and say, okay, and then what? And then what? And the worst case I get to is on my parents' couch, right? And I've been there, done that, went through some horrific things in my life that I had to deal with. And you just learn to say, okay, well, if that's the worst case, then this isn't that bad. But it requires me to
Mm.
name it because otherwise it controls me. And that's why I always look at, when I'm putting options on the table to lay each one of the options out. You have A, B, or C. This is what you can do, the pros and cons of each. And then what are all those fears? What's the uncertainty? What's the doubt? Right? What's my ego that's talking? Right? Because there is so much
Mhm.
that's going on in our heads that until we put it out there, it continues to control us.
Good point. Like, did you have anything tied up identity wise in this that made it difficult to step away? Did you feel like you were a failure if you had to leave and couldn't, work through the situation? Or what were you feeling emotionally during this time, like identity wise?
That's a great question. My desire to want to change the leader, right? And there
Mm.
was a certain element for me is thinking he's not doing it right. So it's my responsibility. If I stay, I can change him and I can help him
Mm.
be a better leader. And there was a real desire to help him do the right things. And that's my identity is baked into that is wanting people to elevate and be the best version of themselves. So there was absolutely a part of me that wanted to, if you will, fix him. And at that point I didn't realize that that's not my job, it's not my responsibility, it's not my fault he's that way. And that was something that I really
Mhm.
had to get past is, I can only be true to myself and I can't be responsible for him changing the way. So I guess there is a lot of identity, and I don't like failure. I felt walking away was
Mm.
absolutely going to feel like failure. It's one thing when you choose to go somewhere else, but I was choosing to stop doing something like, to quit basically.
Mm.
It might be the first time I'm saying that, but I felt like I was quitting and I'm not a quitter.
Right. Yeah, it's not like you were leaving to go take a better opportunity or leaving for nothing, which could feel like giving up. And did you feel like you were abandoning your team, or were you thinking about them at
Oh
all?
my god, that was absolutely a big part of it because I love my team. I still talk to most of them today, and, to explain to them, "I'm sorry, I just can't do this anymore," was hard, right? It is easier if I'm going to a better job and there's a better opportunity, but it felt a bit like abandoning them, and
Mm.
they were like, "Well, what do we do?" And I'm like, "You have to make your choices on what you think is possible and what you need." But I just can't do it anymore. It's impacting me, it's impacting the family, and, I felt like I was apologizing profusely. for leaving.
I mean, it sounds like you had quite a few things to work through with your mental well being, your physical health, working for a toxic boss, but then at the same time wanting to protect your team, but realizing you can only control so much. So, as you were going through and processing all that, because obviously that took time to think, as well as you were mentioning, well, what are my options and what could go wrong? Do you remember the moment you decided, yes, I have to leave? And I'm leaving without lining something else up first.
Uh, yeah, it was that trip up to Rochester in the car and
Oh.
just agreement, alignment. The only thing that was, it was just really a matter of when to do it, right? And when
Mm,
to, give your notice, when to make the statement. I felt like I had to give all the whys, right? Like there's part of me that just couldn't say, okay, here's my letter of resignation and move on. So it took me a little bit of time. I made the decision, but then it was, how do I explain it? And how do I make sure that people understand it so that it's not that I just quit?
And so that was kind of going to be my next question is once you made the decision, what did the next process look like? How long until you put in your notice and yeah, can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I think it was just over a month from when I made the final decision to actually tendering my resignation. And there was, quite honestly, there was a bonus on that. I
Mm,
waited till the bonus would be paid out so that
mhm,
you just wait for that little bit of I can do this until then. And that's, these are the things that have taught me for leaders that they don't understand, right? When they create this toxic environment, like it's costing the money, the company money, it's going to cost the team. There's a lot of cost on the table, but I know I absolutely waited. I didn't give my 100% during that month. Right, I was doing the
mm.
absolute bare minimum, and then I finally made that decision, and it was probably the scariest decision I've ever made in my life.
And what particular made it scary? Because you had already gone through the what's the worst that had happened, and that was living on your parents' couch. So, what would in that moment, what was on your mind that made it so scary?
All of that fear, uncertainty, and doubt comes rolling back out
Mm,
once you go make that decision. Did I make the right,
mm,
second guessing it? Did I make the
mm,
right decision? Did I miss something? Should I have gone all of the what ifs? Should I have gone to HR and had a different conversation? Should I have, called someone else, a mentor, for advice? For me, at least, there's always a second guessing coming in. And so it's like you have to repeat your decision and go back.
mm,
And it was because I had all of those decisions, the whys written out and all of the fears written out, I could go back to all of that and go, okay, nope, nope. Remember, here's what you decided. This is the why. This is how to tame all of these fears. And so I probably went back to that list 3 or 4 times in the process. And I would
mm.
argue that even a month after I had made the decision, it's still, did I have regret? Did I do the right thing? Should I have done it? But fortunately, I kept having that list to go back to and say, nope, these are reminders. This is why I did it. This is the right decision, and to be comfortable with it.
And you were in a bit of a unique situation in that, was it three other people quit as well?
Yes.
So, can you talk a little bit? Did you know that as you were deciding? Did you know there were other people unhappy? How did that play into the whole scenario?
I knew a couple of them were. We had been talking, trying to strategize. Could we fix it? Could we make things better? Was there a different way to do it? Um, a couple, one of them that left surprised me. I had no idea. So it was pure coincidence that it happened at the same time, but it was for the same reasons. So yeah, and I think that's in some ways gave me probably a bit of courage, right? It wasn't just me to know there's others that were feeling similar, but it also felt even more like quitting because we couldn't figure out how to fix it, right? Like I'm a fixer. What do
Mm.
you mean I can't fix this? And so it was difficult to relive that, and but I did have people to go through with it. Yeah.
And did you, when you put in your notice or even like that, like working out your notice period, were there any reactions that surprised you, or was there anything that you dealt with besides the re-questioning your decision that surprised you?
I think I was surprised by other people's reactions. Um, shortly after, I was networking, trying to figure out was it next, and people came up to me with their own fears. They're like, "What do you mean you quit without having another job? What do you mean you're not going to look for another role for 6 months? You can't do that." And that really surprised me when I was having other people come at me and saying, "You can't do that." And I'm like, "Well, why? I did do that, and it's worked out pretty well. Like I prepared for this." And that was what was really interesting because it made me stop and think, well, wait a minute. Are most people staying because they're fearful? And I started to look at this and say, no, I'm in a really good position that financially I prepared for it. I put money aside. I had in my mind when I wanted to go back to work and by what time and how I would do it. And I was going to enjoy my time off. And I was really surprised by the visceral action reaction from others of no, you can't. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, time out. If you could financially afford it and you had planned for this and you knew you could take a year off, would you do it? And they're like, well, yeah, of course. And I'm like, well, that's what I've done. I made this decision. I've gone out and I've set myself up for success. It was scary, but I didn't let fear take over. And now I have to trust in the process and I have to put the plan in action, right? I have a plan. I want to go back to work at a certain point, but I don't want to go back to work for just anyone. And that's
Yeah.
where it all changed for me was being able to sit down and have up until that point, I felt like I was victim to the circumstances and who the job was with and who was my boss. Whereas my next step was to define what I would love and to make that happen. And that's really when I thought of when I finally did leave and got out of the muck, that's when I was able to sit down and say, okay, well, this is why you did this was to have health and to be true to yourself. Now you need to know who you are. But I was really surprised
Yeah.
by the amount of people that couldn't get on board with my decision at times.
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you made the decision to leave a toxic job, just kind of repeating again for the health reasons and on everything you've spoken about, what do you think was the driving principle behind it? Like, because you've talked about a few things. You talked about identity, you've talked about health. What do you think drove your decision that you made?
Life's too short. We spend more than a third of our lives at work and we have a purpose, right? We work not just to make money, but we have our own personal needs. We want purpose, we want psychological safety. There's a lot of things that we crave as humans. And, you know, was I only sticking around for that fear, that one thing? And I realized that I needed to make a choice on freedom and not fear. And it kind of goes back, Jenna, this is going to go way back, but I had always chosen the safe route when I was younger. And so I married the appropriate man, right? That was going to take care. We had the white picket fence. Everything was going to be appropriate. I was making all the right decisions. And I ended up in a situation where I was living on my parents' couch, right? The worst thing happened. We ended up getting divorced, and I played everything safe to only find out of a negative consequence. And I was like,
Mm.
all right. And that changed my trajectory in life just in the mindset, right? Like from there, I was able to do a lot of different things, but I was forced to do that change, right? But because of that change, I then moved to England. I went traveling around the world by myself. So there was a lot of things that I had done personally when I chose freedom. So I think that's always been in the back of my mind is when you choose freedom, there's a lot you can accomplish to come into a work
And
environment. So now fast forward like 10 years and I'm in this work environment and knowing that my identity is to win, be able to solve problems, I had forgotten about that ability to choose freedom and to be able to suppress that fear that motivates us unfortunately too much and say, you know what, I can't let the fear dictate this. I have to choose the freedom. I have to choose myself to go down that unknown path and figure out what's next.
This concept of life is short is how you framed, kind of that. It sounds like that's how you framed the decision that you made. Do you apply that in other areas of your life now? Do you find yourself going back to that, like, hey, life is short, I need to go ahead and do this?
Mantra that rules my life now, which is what would I love? So every decision that I need to make comes back to what would I love? Not what I have to do,
Mm,
but what would I love? And if you go
mm,
back to applying it, then I would love not to work for this toxic boss. I wrote my dream job after leaving that job. What would I love? I would love to partner with executives that want to drive change and know people are key to their success. That's what I would love, and I wasn't going to settle for anything less. I ended up starting a business, right? What would I love?
mm,
I would love to start a business and help eradicate bad management. So that was the catalyst to say, what would I love? And I shouldn't settle for anything less than that. And,
mm.
I look towards thinking idealistically and not realistically, and that it's often we tend to stay with what's realistic because that's the safe route, and it can be scary to think idealistically and go after what you would love, but that path is often the one that's less traveled, and that's where your rewards typically come from. And so it was really.
You
Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just curious, do you ever find that when you say, "What would I love?" and you define it, what happens, or has there been a point where you haven't hit the mark of reaching that?
Oh, sure. But when you go for idealistic, right, and you get 90%, 80%, 70%, you're a lot further along than if you had thought realistic.
Mhm.
And that's why you know, my husband, I want to come back to my husband again. We sat down to envision what we would love for a house. What would we love? Where would we love to live? What would it look like? And we both came back and said we'd love to live on water. We'd love to have this outdoor deck where we can sit having our coffee in the morning. And we went through this whole list of things we would love. And one day we're sitting in our apartment and we look out the window, and we're living on the East River of Manhattan. Our entire apartment had been set up away from the water and not to take advantage of it. But it wasn't until we articulated what we would love and what the future could look like that we were able to see how close we were to it. Right. And we're like, well, wait a minute, we're not that far off. And, we have a beautiful outdoor space that we can go to. So are we 100% in our dream home? No, but we're 80% of our dream home. We then renovated our entire apartment. My desk is, when I look over this way, I'm looking out at the water. Like, everything has changed so that we take advantage of it. And I think that's,
Mm.
we so often limit ourselves because we what the barriers are and what we think that we shouldn't or couldn't do. Oh, I can't quit my job. That's irresponsible. I can't afford it. I can't, like, we tend, and I guess I've done a lot of research on this since, but what I realize is we do have this tendency to put barriers up. And it's, I think, why we don't want to fail. So it's a lot
Mm.
easier to say, oh, we can't do this, then we will never fail, right? If we don't do anything, we will never fail. But what I've learned is you need to just put it out there, because even if you get halfway, you're more than you were going to get to.
Do you find it feels like you are very systematic through everything you've talked about? You were systematic in thinking through what are my options if I were to leave. You're systematic in thinking through, well, what is it that I love, and defining that. Do you find that those processes helped you and you rely on that a lot? And do you think that's a deficit for some people in their decision making?
Now that you say it and ask the question that way, probably yes. I think it is. I think, well, and it is part of, I think there is a system to it. And it's part of the book that I wrote is, I think everyone can learn the system. I don't think it's overly complex.
Mm.
And I think there's an opportunity for all of us to accomplish what we want to accomplish, right? What I learned when I left corporate and started doing some analysis, there were two metrics that really stood out to me. Only 21% of people are engaged in their job. So that means
Mhm.
79% are not fully engaged and not really productive. And I'm like, well, you wonder why teams aren't accomplishing results. Okay, that's good to know. And then the other metric is that less than 30% of individual teams and organizations actually accomplish their goals. And that's
Mm,
another. So now, if you only have 21% that are engaged and 30% are not accomplishing goals, you can see these two numbers are completely tied together. And so that's when
right.
I started thinking about all of this stuff. Well, what keeps us from meeting our goals? Right? It's fear, ego, uncertainty, and doubt keeps us from doing it. Why aren't we able to, we have these great visions. I mean, you've met all of the visionaries, right? Great ideas, but don't actually achieve what they want to do because they don't get people on board or they don't execute. So when you talk about the system, what I have learned is over my career, over my life, I was systematic about it. I think everything I ever approached was do the analysis, get buy-in, put the project plan together. Another one, ask my husband, he'll tell you I project managed my wedding, right? So I am operational in nature, but there is a repeatable formula to be able to be
Mm.
part of that 30% that achieve their goals, right? They're doing something over and over again. And that's what I do apply. And I think everyone can learn those elements of it.
So, curious, just because I'm tapping into my own toxic environment that I once was in, I was called into the boss's office and put on corrective action and literally had no idea it was coming. As in, the boss and I had a great rapport, laughing all the time, and I had no idea that there was anything wrong. So, fast forward, like, now, anytime that somebody says, "Hey, can you give me a call or can you come to my office?" I get anxiety because of that. Did you have anything from the event that you or the experience that you had? Did any of that kind of transfer that you had to try to unlearn some of your response?
Yeah, I think I took a lot away from it. And, I like to have control is what I learned,
Mm,
and when I get stressed, that's what comes out. And so I have to be really careful with, what's going on in my personal life to make sure that that control doesn't take over. Wow, it's really interesting as you're talking about this. Like, I think I look at this toxic leader, I think I saw my negative traits in it. And he was holding up a mirror to
mm,
myself, if I'm being brutally honest. Right. And so I don't want to do a command and control style. It's not who
mhm,
I don't believe that works, but when I saw that
mhm.
happening in myself, that's what came out. And so even today, I have to be very careful that when I get stressed, that doesn't show up again.
I become a dictator. I noticed that when I helped my sister with her wedding and the day of things were going wrong, and I realized under stress I turn into very, like you're saying, coming under control. I call myself the dictator, and I went, "Oh, this is an important lesson here. When under stress, we resort to our default state, and that's who we really are. So that's the part we have to work on, not the part when everything's going well and as expected."
You're spot on. For leadership, I always coach folks that I'm working with is know yourself, but know yourself under
Mm,
stress, because
right.
when everything's going great, life's easy, right? I could have stayed at that job forever, but I was under stress and I'm like, nope, not the right person's showing.
Yeah. So if you were speaking to somebody who was considering the same, in the same situation as you were with, toxic workplace, and they were thinking about leaving, what would you say to them? How would you help them guide their decision?
I would really coach them to self reflect. Like, I wish I had done more self reflection back then, um, to really get to know yourself and what are your triggers, what is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Um, and is there a way to improve the relationship? Right? Like, I regret, honestly, if I can have some regret, I don't regret leaving, but I never felt I had enough knowledge of myself to be able to articulate it to that leader. And I
Mm,
wonder if what I know now of knowing myself, knowing how to lead others, if I could have had a more direct conversation. So I think, my recommendation, I would never recommend someone just quitting. I don't think that's the right answer. I think you have to make sure you know yourself, systematically work through the issues at work, and then make a informed decision, right? And know that
Mm.
there is a plan, right? So the plan may not be going, I'm only leaving if I have another job. The plan might be, I need to take the time off or a sabbatical or whatever it might be, but to have a plan and not just recklessly run away from something.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah, it's the dark side, isn't it? Where we get sometimes, and I think today's cultures, we can get a little bit too. I'm just going to give up and go do something else versus stick it out. Which it depends on the situation. Like you said, you really have to analyze it to understand: am I running away because I'm afraid, or because I'm backing down from something that I shouldn't be backing down from, or am I making the right decision for, what's going on with my life and the outcomes that I'm after, and really is leaving the best decision.
It's funny
It's
as we're
very
talking about
individual.
this, I'm realizing I didn't have a coach back then. I
Yeah.
didn't really have someone that could help me because it could have very well been myself that I could have changed something. I think with age comes wisdom, and there's a lot that I've learned, and I could have probably used someone else's wisdom at the time in a different way.
It's a good insight. So when you reflect on the conversation we've had today, what's one thing you want to leave top of mind with people?
To choose freedom, really go after what you would love, because I think when you can define what you would love, then the answers become clear. When we just go after, like, we were driven by fear, we lose out on a lot of different things. So I think it's really choosing that freedom, saying what you would love, and then system what I'm learning from you is this, using the systematic approach to it to get there, right? So
Mm.
express that end vision, what you would love, engage the people that are going to help you, and then come up with a plan to execute and make it happen.
That sounds great. And Kathy, how can folks learn more about what you do or find you online? Where do they go?
Absolutely. The easiest place, if you go to kathyeastwood.com, and you can
Mm.
learn more, because I've actually been systematizing this approach, and it's the E3 leadership code to help people. And I have a book coming out, and that's available on kathyeastwood.com, that talks about this approach, talks more about the story, and how to choose freedom over fear.
Oh, Kathy, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And to our audience, make the decision, act on it, be accountable, and until next time, stay unstoppable.